Hi, Sid Dobrin here with Inventive Fishing, and I've been thinking more about the situation in Biscayne National Park, and the National Park Service has recently released new general management plan, which established a no-fishing marine zone that bans recreational fishing from more than 10,000 acres of the park waters, including 30% of the reef area. Now, part of the real frustration here is that the no fishing marine zone literally means just that: no fishing permitted. But this closure does not include access to those areas for other forms of recreational activities like scuba or snorkeling. Now, normally I'd have an easier time with this simply because I am a diver. I worked as a scuba instructor for a while, and generally I love scuba, snorkeling, and spearfishing, and I've always seen the scuba industry and the fishing industry as sharing a lot of commonalities, including conservation philosophies and practices. So, of course, when the National Park Service announced its general management plan and the no fishing marine zone, I, like others, became concerned that behind the scenes we might be seeing an industry grab for territorial rights to the Biscayne waters. Now, on the surface, that seems to be a bit conspiratorial, particularly given the shared oceanic enthusiasm each industry shares. But then I was given a letter that was sent in 2012 to Mark Lewis, the superintendent of Biscayne National Park. The letter, which is signed by 9 individuals who identify themselves as leaders in the sport diving industry in Florida, explicitly asks that a marine reserve be established in Biscayne Bay. What this letter suggests is that for the past 3 years, at least, members of the dive industry have been lobbying the park superintendent to establish the closures. This seems a bit dubious to me, that industry leaders would be asking for a type of closure that essentially reserves a national resource for private use. Oh, and to be clear, if not a bit snarky, the first sentence of the letter reads, "The undersigned businesses and organizations are leaders in or otherwise associated with the sport diving industry in South Florida." Now, this is a bit of an exaggeration and a push for a bit more ethos than those who sign the letter actually carry. Of the 9 signees, 1 is a trade show executive, 1 a museum director, 1 a representative from a social organization with approximately 2,000 members, 1 a representative of a splinter group from the social organization, 1 a representative from a television show, and only 4 from South Florida dive shops. Now, if we start north at the Jupiter Dive Center, which is about 90 miles north of Biscayne, we can easily locate about 75 dive shops. South, just to Isla Mirada, only 40 miles south of Biscayne, we can add another 20 plus dive shops. So industry representatives here account for less than 4% of the local dive shops. Plus, and let's be clear here, of these 9 signees, 1 is from an organization based in Tennessee and 1 from an organization based in New York. And nowhere in the letter are signatures of any of the primary professional organizations. Where's Patty, NAUI, SSI, BSAC, CMAS, SAA, SCOTSAC, or any of the other 20 plus professional and training organizations? It's not just that this letter doesn't have the support of big national and international organizations. It's that these 9 individuals felt empowered enough to start campaigning to shut out recreational saltwater anglers from a national park in order to ensure their exclusive access to those national resources. The letter claims that scientific data shows that marine reserves closed to fishing work to restore reef systems. Well, actually the letter says that the signees believe this to be true. Their evidence lies in studies of marine reserves that are early on in the Tortugas National Park and Everglades National Park closures. but there's absolutely no identification of those studies. So I'd like to offer a little counter evidence to that claim, as reported in an article by W.J. Fletcher et al. In the latest issue of the Ecological Society of America, called rather tellingly, Large-Scale Expansion of No-Take Closures Within the Great Barrier Reef Has Not Enhanced Fishery Production. The researchers from 3 different universities explained that approximately a decade after the closures were implemented, there was still no evidence of long-term net fishery benefits being reflected in any material recovery in catches, and that the results from the Great Barrier Reef do not support the expectation that large-scale closures to all types of fishing will benefit or at worst have neutral impacts on surrounding fisheries. Rather, they currently support the alternative hypotheses that where fish stocks are already effectively managed for optimum yields, additional generalized no-take closures are likely to result in reductions in overall catch. That sort of outsciences the common beliefs that the signees and others have erroneously maintained about the effectiveness of closures. It seems to me that a 10-year Great Barrier Reef study holds a bit more credence than early and unnamed studies. Okay, look, I could nitpick this letter to ribbons, and it should be evident to all of us that as far as a persuasive document goes, this one's pretty damn weak. But there's a bigger problem here. Whether this letter had any actual influence or not, and we're likely never to know that, but obviously somehow the National Park Service got the idea that the marine protection reserves were a good idea and that limiting those zones to exclude only fishing was also a good idea. Maybe I'm too receptive to conspiratorial theories in this situation, but after seeing this letter, I can't help but wonder what strings were being pulled to get this general management plan enacted. While we're supposed to accept the conservation argument that's being highlighted as being driven by an honest conservation ethic, the evident industry favoritism and privilege that seems to lie just beneath the surface is more than bothersome. I'm not buying the claim that closing areas to recreational fishing and leaving those same areas open to boating and diving is the best possible action that the Park Service could have come up with. I'm concerned by the exclusion of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission from the process determining Florida water fisheries policies, and I'm more than irked by what this letter suggests. But let me be clear here too. I am not issuing an anti-diving or anti-dive industry position. The dive industry deserves our support as much as we'd like theirs. But these kinds of industry-driven territorialisms will ultimately divide 2 important conservation-minded industries that ought to be collaborating in order to promote marine conservation efforts. Fish on. Can't.